Okay, so today in the final installment of the covering of the Stronghold Kingdoms research tree, we're going to be focusing on the education tab. It is quite a large tab, similar to military, so let's jump right in and get started. First up, we have mathematics, which reduces the research time of future researches. It is a skill that is not necessarily needed unless you're attempting to rush through the research tree as fast as possible. If you find your research time starting to get a bit long, or if you feel a little impatient, it's taking longer than it should, you might want to start investing research points in it. But keep in mind that just because the next research didn't take 30 seconds, that's not reason enough to start investing in mathematics. Save beyond the first 3 ranks to unlock some of these other researches below them. Speaking of the researches below them, first up we have architecture, which increases the build speed of village buildings depending upon how much you research it. This is a technology you could save until at least rank 16, and I would personally probably save it until the prince rank. Below that we have merchant guilds, which is a critical research, especially in the early game, as when you first start out you don't have many peasants and therefore you won't be making many taxes, and by selling goods to the market with merchants you'll probably be making the bulk of your gold this way. So I would definitely research merchant guilds as soon as it's available. Researching it further will increase the number of merchants you can hire per market in your village. This is not necessarily necessary, but if you find markets a bit expensive, say for your taste, you didn't invest in tools in the industry tab, you might want to consider putting a couple more points into it. On the second tier of the merchant guilds we have transportation, which drastically improves the speed your merchants travel at. If you're planning on doing any mass selling, I would definitely recommend this technology. Although it can be a bit expensive with 10 points to invest in, it will make selling and buying things at the market much faster and much simpler. Commerce is debatable. If you start by a border, in other words you have a country right on the other side of you, if you start in a small country, then maybe it's worth it. Otherwise, especially level 4, it's very seldom you'll actually want to trade worldwide. I would probably hold off on the 4th one till last. Really, who wants to be down in Scotland, up in Scotland, and trade at a market down in England? That's a 12-hour trip both ways. It doesn't make sense. And okay, let me redact that. It makes sense in the context of if you are on the border between Scotland and England and you want to trade to the parish right on the other side of that border, which is about only 10 minutes away from you. That would be about the only scenario that it would actually be practical in. Anyway, continuing on down the line, we have engineering. Now, engineering increases the storage space in your village for particular good types or just goods in general if you research engineering all the way through. However, it's important to remember that the real focus of engineering is increasing the capacity of particular storage units within your village. Up first, we're going to go with housing capacity. Now, this is one of the most critical because it allows you to recruit big armies and raise your taxes, but at the same time, you're going to have more peasants because of it, and therefore require more food. If you do not have enough research done in the food area of your research tree, you might want to hold off a little bit on it, but really, housing capacity is a very good research, and I would definitely max it before rank 16. Armory capacity, invest in it as you see the need. If you're logging in the morning and you find your armory is full, maybe put another point in it. Otherwise, it's very situation dependent. I don't want to say there's any strict rule of thumb. Maxing it all the way gets you up to either 600 or 500. I think it's 500 max capacity. So in other words, you could have 500 bows in your armory. Incapacity. Now, this is definitely one you'll probably want to invest maybe 2 points in and then stop, because it doesn't really, you don't need to have 15,000 beer sitting around on tap in your village. It's unnecessary. If you have that much, you probably want to sell it because you're going to be needing money early on. This is definitely a late game research. I wouldn't research it before hitting the prince level. Like I said, a couple points is more than enough. You're going to be researching engineering anyway, which will slightly increase the capacity of the inn regardless. So you won't be stuck with starting capacity unless you research it or anything like that. Hall capacity is quite the same thing. Unless you're going big on banquets, it is something you can ignore until you hit prince rank. Granary capacity, again, a couple points, sort of like the inn capacity. If you have that much food on your hands, you probably just want to sell it in the early game because otherwise you're not utilizing your resources to their maximum potential. Stockpile capacity, on the other hand, is actually quite a useful research, and you might want to invest maybe 4 points in this one because it will allow you to build bigger buildings such as the cathedral, especially if you didn't invest in tools in the industry tab. We've covered this before. If you didn't invest in tools, these buildings are going to cost more than they would with tool research, and therefore you might have to put an extra point in stockpile capacity. Again, it is nothing too serious until you want to build your villages to the max, because weapons buildings really start to cost a lot once you hit maybe 10 of them. So it's, like I said, it's sort of like the armor research. If you find yourself needing to build buildings and you don't have enough storage space, then you can put another point or two into stockpile capacity, but until that time it is not really all that important. Now the arts branch of the tree increases your passive honor. This is the honor bonus that is generated through some sort of algorithm in your village just by being there. So in other words, what you have is some passive honor bonus from churches in your village, some from decoration, and some from this research. All those are added up and then multiplied by your current popularity. If you have low popularity, you won't get as much honor. But I believe the tutorial introduces you to what arts does and says it's a good research, and I agree. If you have points available to be put into arts, do it, because they unlock as you unlock the additional ranks as you rank up. Now, a couple of sub-branches off of arts. Number one is philosophy. This reduces the amount of gold needed to buy research points. Now, in the early game, you're not going to need to buy research points, or if you do, they're not going to cost much. This is definitely a technology I will hold off on until at least knight rank, and probably prince rank, depending upon how fast you play. If you're a player with premium token in play and you keep your research queue full all the time, then philosophy can be a little bit more beneficial because you're probably not going to be advancing in rank fast enough to earn those research points to keep your research queue full. In which case you're going to be buying research points and the cost is going to climb higher and higher until you start investing in philosophy. Either way, there have been some studies done on it, and the return in investment doesn't really start paying off until, I don't know, about 20 research points bought or something like that. Justice is a sub-branch of philosophy, and I would ignore this one altogether, especially the first one. The stocks building and unlocks is actually worse than just having higher popularity in the first age. In subsequent ages, the popularity you get from passive buildings increases, so it can be feasible, but personally I enjoy having higher popularity, which means more peasants coming into your villages, rather than reducing your popularity, fewer peasants coming into your villages, but having slightly more honor. Subsequent researches into the justice branch unlock more punishment buildings, all of which decrease your popularity at the benefit of adding more passive honor, such as like what arts did. A sub-branch of arts is theology, and this is quite an extensive branch. Early research into it merely increases your faith points by what ultimately proves to be insignificant. 120 faith points per day is irrelevant. I spend more than that just clearing diseases in my parishes. So the really only reason to research it is to unlock its sub-branches. For its sub-branches, we first off have ordination, which allows you to create monks. If you're going in for a more monking strategy, you might want to research this one all the way to 8, but in the early game that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and 4 would probably be plenty. Pilgrimage increases the monk's speed, which, depending upon your use of monks, could be needed. If you're going to be sending monks to your local parish, you probably can get away with only putting 1 point in. If you're going to be sending them halfway across the country to aid in the war effort of your house, 8 all of a sudden becomes a lot more important than it did before. Baptism increases the number of points you can remove, the number of disease points you can remove from your parish with every monk. At its first level, which is level 3, and enables you to heal parishes. Anytime before you research this, it's impossible to heal a parish. It removes 3 at a time, whereas level 8 removes 10. In the early game, 1 point is enough. I wouldn't max it out until at least rank 16, and probably not until rank, or the prince rank. I keep forgetting, is it rank 21 or 22? Marriage allows you to bless parishes. This one can be skipped, especially if you're more of the militaristic type. This one would definitely be overlooked in that case. There was really no... Firefly did beef up, or they did buff it a bit, but it's still not all that important. Confirmation allows you to inquisition parishes, which decreases their parish popularity, which is pretty much the exact opposite of marriage. Now, again, if you didn't invest in marriage, you're probably not going to want to invest in confirmation either. Eucharist gives you the power to interdict villages, which essentially means to protect them from attacks, be it AI or player. This will probably be the main reason you went into the theology branch to begin with, because being able to protect your villages from players timing up attacks on them is ultimately the only way to save your villages from a determined attacker. As soon as you have access to this tree, it would probably behoove you to research the first level so you can at least ID yourself, ID being shorthand for interdiction. Subsequent levels of it increase the level of players you can interdict, but this has no bearing on your level itself. In other words, you could be level 16 and still have only 1 point in Eucharist and still be able to ID yourself, even though it says interdict target rank level 8. That only applies to players who are not you, who you might be wanting to protect through interdiction. Confession gives you access to absolution, which reduces the excommunication time on villages. Extreme unction it gives you access to excommunication, which allows you to place excommunication on other people's, preferably enemies' villages. Remember, doing so is generally considered an act of war, similar to an attack. If you place excommunication on a village, that player cannot send out monks from that village, but they can have it removed through confession, which has to come from a different village, of course, but it can be removed. The primary point of extreme unction or excommunication is to prevent players from self-IDing their villages, self-interdiction, which is a thing where you send out a monk from the village it's in and then target that village it's in, and you have pretty much of instant protection like that. Literature, in one of the final 2 branches of this, the education tree, gives you access to theaters. This is important in the early game as the boost to popularity. You will probably want to research it as soon as it unlocks. And it continues all the way up to level 5, which gives you access to maples. All these buildings, when placed at their maximum, give you a popularity bonus of +6. As you place them further away from your keep, the popularity bonus goes down, so you want to make sure they remain close to your keep. Decoration is a bit like justice, except it doesn't actually detract any positive popularity from your village. It gives you access to flower beds and all the way up to gilded statues, all of which increase the passive honor generation in your village. If you're not really into passive honor, or you don't have high popularity, it doesn't make much sense, and the flower beds can be deleted as you research more important buildings because they take up a lot of space, and the popularity bonus is pretty much negligible. So the first one isn't all that important, but later ones can be very useful, especially the 5th one. So I would research those as they become available, same as with literature. And if you don't need the building, just delete it. You'll get half the resources back. So I think this pretty much covered the education tree, which is the fourth and final tree in the Stronghold Kingdoms research. I hope you found my insight useful, and thank you very much for sticking with the series as long as you did. I understand it takes a little while to do these bigger trees, and if you listened all the way through, thank you very much. And until next time, although not in this series, farewell.
Stronghold Kingdoms. The battle has just begun.